Story 1. Home Alone with a Book. 20-year-old Max always enjoyed spending time alone. His parents had gone away for the weekend to visit friends, leaving him in their big country house. The evening was quiet, with rain tapping on the windows and the wind rustling the tree branches outside. Max decided to spend the time reading a book his friend had recommended. It was a detective novel called Shadows of the Past. He wrapped himself in a blanket, sat in a chair by the fireplace, and started reading. The book was gripping. It told the story of a series of murders in a small town, and each chapter ended on a suspenseful note. Max got so immersed in the story that he lost track of time. But then, suddenly, he heard a noise. Something had fallen upstairs. Max froze for a moment. He knew the house was empty. His parents wouldn't be back for 2 more days. He put the book down and listened carefully. Again, he heard something, footsteps. He grabbed his phone to call his parents, but there was no signal. The storm must have damaged the lines. Max decided to go upstairs, holding a baseball bat in his hand. The footsteps seemed to be coming from his parents' bedroom. He opened the door and froze. A man wearing a mask was sitting on the bed. He held a knife and stared directly at Max. "You shouldn't have come in here," the man said, his voice calm but threatening. Max started backward, slamming the door shut. He heard the man laugh and then footsteps getting closer. Max ran to his room, locked the door, and wedged a chair against it. He tried calling the police, but his phone was dead. Suddenly, he noticed something on the floor, a note that hadn't been there before. It read, "You're next." A cold chill ran through Max. He remembered the book he had been reading. In it, the killer left notes for his victims. He opened the book randomly and saw that the next chapter was titled "The Final Step." His heart raced. He realized this wasn't just a coincidence. Max decided to hide in the basement. He ran to the stairs but suddenly remembered he'd left the book in his room. He went back, but the book was gone. Instead, there was a knife on the floor, similar to the one the man in the mask had been holding. Max heard footsteps outside the door. He grabbed the knife and ran to the basement. There, he found an old chest he had never opened before. Inside were photographs, pictures of him. On the back of each was a date, as if someone had been watching him. The last photo was taken today, while he was reading the book. Max stood frozen, holding the book. His mind raced, piecing things together. The book had been given to him by Jake, a friend he'd met a few months ago. Jake had always seemed a bit odd, but Max had never paid it much attention. They'd gone for coffee together, talked about books, and Jake often mentioned how important it was to unravel the mysteries of life. Now, those words took on a sinister meaning. Max tried calling Jake, but his phone was dead. Suddenly, he heard a voice from upstairs. "Max, are you there?" It was Jake's voice. Max felt a wave of relief, but then he remembered the photos in the chest. His heart raced. He didn't answer, holding his breath. The voice continued. "I know you're there. You read the book, didn't you? It's about you." Max felt panic rise in his chest. He realized the book wasn't just entertainment. It was the key to something much bigger. He flipped through the pages, searching for clues, and suddenly his eyes landed on one line. "Sometimes, the darkest secrets are hidden in those you know best." Max decided to get out of the basement. He remembered an old tunnel that led to the shed. His dad had told him it was built by his grandfather, but no one had used it. Max crawled through the narrow passage, feeling the walls press in on him. When he finally emerged outside, he saw his parents' car. It was empty, but the keys were still in the ignition. Max felt a sense of relief. Maybe he could escape. He got in the car and tried to start the engine, but then he heard a knock on the trunk. His heart stopped. He got out of the car and carefully opened the trunk. Inside were his parents. They were tied up, their mouths taped shut, their eyes full of fear. Max rushed to them, trying to free them, but then he heard a voice behind him. "You shouldn't have left." Max turned around. It was Jake. He was holding a gun and smiling, but the smile was cold and soulless. "Why are you doing this?" Max asked, his voice trembling. "Because you're next," Jake replied. "This is a game, Max. And you're part of it." Jake explained that it was all part of his game. He didn't belong to any group, wasn't involved with cults or criminals. This was his own game, a game he created just for Max. "You've always loved puzzles," Jake said, moving closer. "I'm just giving you the chance to play the most interesting one." Max realized his only chance was to outsmart Jake. He remembered the knife he had taken from the basement. When Jake got closer, Max lunged at him. They fell to the ground, fighting for the gun. Jake was stronger, but Max fought desperately. He thought of his parents, still trapped in the trunk, and that gave him strength. Suddenly, the gun went off. Jake froze. He looked at Max in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe it had ended this way. Then he fell to the ground, and Max saw the blood on his chest. Max freed his parents, and they left the house together. When they got to the police station, Max realized Jake was gone. There was no blood, no trace of him where he had fallen. The police found no evidence of his existence. Max returned home a few days later. On the doorstep was the book. He opened it to the last page. It read, "The game is not over." Max could never forget that night. He knew Jake was out there, waiting. And the game continued. Story 2. The dark evening in the empty house. Alice had always loved silence. She adored reading books, losing herself in worlds of words where time stood still and reality faded into the background. Tonight, she had decided to stay home alone. Her parents had gone to a party, and her older brother was, as usual, out with his friends. The house was empty, quiet, and the only sound was the rain tapping against the windows, reminding her that a storm was raging outside. She grabbed a book she had been meaning to read, a thriller promising tense moments and unexpected twists. She turned on a small lamp beside her chair, wrapped herself in a blanket, and began reading. The book hooked her from the first page. Alice didn't even realize an hour had passed. Suddenly, she heard a soft tap on the window. At first, she thought it was just the wind moving the branches of a tree, but then the tap came again, sharper this time. Alice stood up from her chair and walked to the window. The curtains hid whatever was outside, only darkness. She pulled back the curtain and peeked out. No one, probably just my imagination, she thought, turning back to her chair. But no sooner had she sat down than she heard another sound, a creak, like someone stepping on a squeaky floorboard in the hallway. Alice froze. she knew for sure no one was in the house. "Who's there?" Her voice trembled. There was no answer. Alice decided to check, to make absolutely sure she was alone. She cautiously walked to the door, opened it, and peered into the hallway. No one. But when she turned back to the chair, she was stunned to see that the book she had been reading was gone. She was certain she had left it on the table next to her chair. "This can't be happening," she whispered, scanning the room. The book was nowhere to be found. Alice's heart started pounding faster. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the feeling that someone else was in the house wouldn't leave her. She decided to go to the kitchen for a glass of water and to calm herself down. As she walked through the hallway, her eyes caught something near the bathroom door. On the floor lay a small note. She picked it up and read, "You're not alone. He's here." A chill ran down her spine. She looked around, but saw no one. Who could have left this note? And who was he? She began checking every room, but there was no one. Suddenly, the lights went out. Alice was plunged into total darkness. She tried to stay calm, but her heart was racing, threatening to leap out of her chest. She knew where the candles were kept and began to search for them blindly. When she finally found one and lit it, she saw that something had changed in the room. On the wall where there had once been nothing hung a portrait of a stranger. The man was staring at her, and his gaze was so real, so intense, that Alice felt as if he were about to speak. Alice decided to call her parents, to tell them about what was happening. She grabbed her phone, but the screen was black. She tried to turn it on, but nothing worked. Then, unexpectedly, the phone rang. It was her parents. Alice answered it, relief flooding her chest. "Mom, something strange is happening," she began, but the voice on the other end interrupted her. "Alice, we're still at the party." "Are you okay?" her mother asked. "Yeah, but didn't you just call me?" Alice asked, confused. "No, we didn't call," her mother replied. Alice's blood ran cold. Then who had just called her from her parents' phone? Alice turned back into the living room, where the candle still burned. She looked again at the portrait on the wall. Something about it seemed familiar. She stepped closer and squinted. The man's face on the portrait resembled her brother's, only older, with a different expression. She had never seen this portrait before. Suddenly, she heard footsteps upstairs. Someone was walking on the second floor. Alice knew her brother wasn't home. She grabbed the candle and went upstairs. When she opened her brother's bedroom door, she saw that no one was there. But on the bed lay the book she had been reading. It was open to the last page, which read, "He's always been here." Alice descended the stairs and sat in the chair. She could feel her mind trying to piece everything together. The portrait, the missing book, the note, the call, it all started to make sense. She remembered how her brother used to joke about there being a ghost in the house. She had never believed him, but now she realized it was true. Suddenly, she heard someone sit in the chair across from her. She looked up and saw the same man from the portrait. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with sadness. "I didn't want to scare you," he said. "I just wanted you to know the truth." Alice couldn't say a word. She understood now. This man, this ghost, was her grandfather, who had died many years ago. He had always been in this house, but he had never shown himself. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because you're the only one who can hear me," he replied. Alice woke up in the chair. The candle had burned out, and the portrait was gone from the wall. But she knew it hadn't been a dream. She could still feel her grandfather's presence and now understood that she had never truly been alone in that house. This story stayed with her forever, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying secrets aren't in books, but in real life. Story 3. The Forest of Secrets. The small town of Willow Creek, hidden deep in the dense forests of northern Maine, held a secret. Locals whispered about the woods, known as the Whispering Forest, claiming there was something unusual about them. But no one took it seriously. At least, not until the day 14-year-old Lisa Morrison vanished. Lisa was known for her adventurous spirit. She often wandered the forest but always made it back home before dark. This time, she didn't. Her backpack was found near a trail leading deeper into the woods. Inside was her journal, and the last entry read, "I know they're here. I heard their voices." Lisa's disappearance shocked the entire town, especially her best friends, 13-year-old Ethan, 12-year-old Sophie, and 11-year-old Noah. They couldn't just sit and wait for the adults to find Lisa. They had to act. Their first clue was Lisa's journal. Among the pages, they found cryptic notes that seemed to mark locations in the forest. Ethan, a puzzle enthusiast, deciphered the code. It pointed to 3 spots on an old forest map: the tree with the eye, the marked stone, and the underground entrance. Determined, the kids gathered their flashlights, pocket knives, and a camera before heading into the woods. Their first stop, the tree with the eye. After an hour of searching, they found it, a massive oak with a carved symbol resembling an eye. Beneath it, they discovered a torn piece of striped fabric, Lisa's sweater. Then Sophie noticed something strange. The tree had tiny scratches, as if someone had tried to carve something else. When they looked closer, they saw the message. She wasn't the first. The second location was the marked stone, a large boulder with a symbol, a triangle with a circle inside. Surrounding it were signs of recent digging. The kids hesitated but decided to check. Under a thin layer of dirt, they unearthed a rusted metal box. Inside were photographs of children who had disappeared over the past 50 years. Lisa's picture was among them. On the back of one photo was a chilling message. They belonged to the forest. Panic set in. This wasn't just a disappearance, something, or someone, was taking kids. The third location was the underground entrance. They found it near an old fallen tree, hidden beneath thick bushes. Pulling back the branches, they uncovered a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Ethan suggested they go in. Sophie hesitated. Then, they heard voices. Faint whispers. Coming from below, with their hearts pounding, they descended. The stone tunnel was lined with strange symbols, the same ones from the tree and the stone. At the end of the tunnel, they entered a cavern. And there, tied to the wall, was Lisa. She was alive. Beside her stood a man in a mask. He turned slowly toward them and spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The man removed his mask. The kids froze. It was Mr. Harper, their history teacher. The one who always seemed kind and warm. But now, his face was cold, his eyes burning with something dark. In his hand was a knife. His voice was calm, yet threatening. You weren't supposed to see this, he said, stepping closer. Lisa was chosen. And now, so are you. Ethan, always the leader, stepped in front of Sophie and Lisa. His hands trembled, but he held his ground. Chosen for what? He asked, trying to stall. Mr. Harper's lips curled into a chilling smile. To be sold. There are people who pay well for smart, healthy kids. And you, my dear students, are perfect candidates. Sophie's body went cold. She couldn't believe it. Their teacher, the man who helped them with homework and joked in class, was a monster. Lisa sobbed, but Harper didn't even glance at her. Then, something unexpected happened. Noah, the quiet, shy one, stepped forward. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with a strange determination. I knew you'd do this, he said, looking at Mr. Harper. Silence. Ethan turned to Noah, eyes wide. What? Noah took a deep breath. I helped him. Sophie's stomach dropped. My family is in debt, Noah continued, voice barely above a whisper. He promised us money if I helped find new kids. Betrayal hit like a punch to the gut. Ethan's fists clenched, his face burning with anger. You traitor, he shouted, lunging at Noah. But Mr. Harper moved faster. He shoved Ethan aside, sending him crashing to the ground. Sophie rushed to untie Lisa's ropes. Noah stood frozen, pain etched on his face, but he didn't try to explain. Enough, Mr. Harper snapped, raising his knife. None of you are leaving. Then, the cave trembled. The walls cracked. Thick roots slithered through the stone. Rocks began to fall. The forest was waking up. Mr. Harper's face twisted in panic. We need to get out. Now. Ethan seized the moment. He tackled Harper, knocking the knife from his grip. They wrestled on the ground, grunting and struggling. Sophie freed Lisa, and together they bolted for the exit. Noah stood still, tears in his eyes. He looked at Ethan, then Harper. Then, in a sudden burst of movement, he shoved Harper back, giving Ethan a chance to escape. Run! Noah screamed. Ethan, Sophie, and Lisa sprinted toward the exit. But Noah stayed behind. Harper, furious, lunged at him. You little. Then, a massive rock fell from above, sealing the cave entrance. The children ran through the forest, hearts pounding, lungs burning. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of town. Lisa was reunited with her family. She never spoke about what happened in the forest. Mr. Harper's body was found in a collapsed cave. Noah was never seen again. The kids never returned to the Whispering Forest. But sometimes, late at night, they still heard the voices from their dreams. They knew the forest was still there, waiting. And one day, it would wake again. Story 4. Shadow in the Forest. The small town of Black River, Oregon, had always been quiet and peaceful. Nestled among dense forests, it lived at its own leisurely pace. But one morning, everything changed. 12-year-old Emily Carter went missing. Her bicycle was found near a forest trail leading to an old bridge. There were signs of a struggle on the ground, but no other clues. Detective Jacob Wright, a former New York City cop who had moved to Black River after a personal tragedy, took on the case. He knew the first 48 hours were critical. But the forest surrounding the town was vast, and time was merciless. Jacob began by interviewing the locals. Most of the residents were sympathetic, but no one had noticed anything suspicious. However, old Mrs. Gray, who lived on the outskirts of town, told him about a strange truck she had seen that evening. She couldn't make out the license plate, but she remembered a large scratch on the hood in the shape of a lightning bolt. Jacob headed to the forest where the bicycle had been found. He noticed that the ground near the bridge had been slightly dug up, as if someone had tried to hide something. Calling in a team for excavation, he found an old cell phone. The screen was cracked, but the device still worked. The last call had been made to a number belonging to a local mechanic, Tom Harrison. Jacob headed to the forest where the bicycle had been found. He noticed that the ground near the bridge had been slightly dug up, as if someone had tried to hide something. Calling in a team for excavation, he found an old cell phone. The screen was cracked, but the device still worked. The last call had been made to a number belonging to a local mechanic, Tom Harrison. Tom denied any involvement, but Jacob noticed that his truck had a scratch in the shape of a lightning bolt. Tom claimed he had been at home with his wife, but his wife seemed nervous and couldn't confirm his alibi. Jacob began to suspect that Tom was hiding something. During a search of the Harrisons' house, Jacob found a basement locked with a padlock. Inside, he discovered a room covered in photographs of children. Among them was Emily. But what shocked him even more was a symbol drawn on one of the walls, a triangle with a circle inside. It was a sign he had seen before in a case he had investigated in New York. Back then, it had been linked to an underground cult that abducted children for rituals. Tom denied any connection to the symbol, claiming it was just graffiti. But Jacob knew it was a lie. He dug deeper and found that Tom was connected to a group of people who regularly gathered in the forest. Among them was the town's mayor, Richard Baker. Jacob realized the case was much deeper than he had thought. He decided to go into the forest alone to find the cult's meeting place. After hours of searching, he stumbled upon an old shack hidden among the trees. Inside, he found Emily. She was alive but terrified. Next to her lay the body of a man who, as it turned out, was her uncle. He had tried to save her but had been killed. Jacob carefully took Emily by the hand, trying to calm her down. She was trembling, her eyes wide with fear. He knew they had to get out of there as quickly as possible. The shack where she had been held was gloomy and cold, with old, battered walls that smelled of dampness and decay. Strange objects lay on the floor, candles, knives, and what looked like ritual clothing. Jacob couldn't believe that such horrifying things could happen in a place like this. They stepped out of the shack, but the forest around them was dense and dark. Jacob felt every step echo in the silence. Emily clung tightly to his hand, her breathing uneven. He tried to orient himself, but the forest seemed endless. Suddenly, figures emerged from the shadows. First one, then another, and another. There were at least 10 of them. They surrounded Jacob and Emily, and the glint of knives and other menacing objects flashed in their hands. Among them was Mayor Baker. His face, usually calm and confident, now bore an expression bordering on obsession. He stepped forward, his voice cold and resolute. "You shouldn't have come here, right?" he said. "This wasn't your business. We're doing this for the town. For its cleansing. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary." Jacob felt his heart sink. He knew they were trapped. His gun was with him, but against so many people, it was almost useless. Emily pressed closer to him, and he could feel her fear transferring to him. He braced himself for the worst, but then, voices echoed through the forest. At first, it was a whisper, then loud commands. Police officers emerged from the shadows, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jacob felt his body relax, but he couldn't allow himself to fully let his guard down. The police surrounded the cult members, and Mayor Baker, who had seemed all-powerful just moments ago, now looked confused and helpless. It turned out that Tom Harrison's wife, fearing for her safety, had secretly contacted the police. She told them what she knew, and they had arrived just in time. The cult members were arrested, and Emily was returned to her family. She was safe, but her eyes still reflected a terror that might never fully fade. Jacob Wright stayed in Black River. He knew his work here wasn't done. Even after the arrests, Mayor Baker and his followers remained a mystery. The symbols he had seen in the Harrisons' basement haunted him. He knew this wasn't the end. Something bigger, something much darker, was hiding in the shadows of the forest. Sometimes at night, he dreamed of those symbols. He would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling as though someone was watching him. Even in the quietest places, like Black River, the darkest secrets could lurk. And the shadow in the forest was always waiting, ready to return. Story 5. I had been working at the city morgue for over a decade. And during that time, I had seen my fair share of eerie sights. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling events that unfolded one fateful night. As the only worker on the night shift, I was accustomed to the solitude. But that night, an inexplicable sense of unease hung heavy in the air. As I went about my usual routine, preparing the bodies for autopsies, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It started with small things. A missing instrument here. A misplaced document there. I dismissed them as my own forgetfulness, attributing the lapses to the late hours and my tired mind. But soon, more alarming incidents unfolded. One night, while working on a deceased patient, I turned my back for a moment to retrieve a tool. When I returned, the body's organs had vanished from the tray. It was impossible for organs to simply disappear without a trace. Yet there they were, gone as if they had never existed. My heart raced, and a cold sweat trickled down my spine. I searched the room, desperately hoping to find an explanation. But all I found were empty shelves and vacant drawers. Fear gripped me like a vice as I struggled to find a rational explanation. Was someone playing a macabre prank? Or was something far more sinister at play? Determined to uncover the truth, I began conducting my own investigation. I meticulously reviewed the security footage, searching for any signs of unusual activity. But to my dismay, the cameras had captured nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if the organs were disappearing by some unseen force, defying all logical explanation. Night after night, the inexplicable continued. More organs vanished, leaving behind an eerie trail of unanswered questions. Finally, on the eve of my breaking point, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Armed with a flashlight and trembling with trepidation, I ventured into the depths of the morgue, determined to confront the source of these unexplainable phenomena. I stumbled upon a door I had never noticed before, concealed behind a forgotten cabinet. What I saw next shattered my fragile sense of reality. I saw all the organs on the table that were disappearing. They were laid out in the shape of a human body, as if someone wanted to assemble a new person with their own hands. I immediately ran out of that room and closed the door. But after the police arrived, they didn't find anything in the room. I still don't know what it was or who did it, but the fear that it could happen again lives in my head forever. I've worked in hospitals' morgue for over a decade, witnessing life's final moments frozen in time. Every day, I encountered death, observing the fragile transition from the living to the deceased. But little did I know, the most horrifying experience of my career was yet to come. It was a dark, stormy night, the kind that sends shivers down your spine. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of machinery and the occasional echo of footsteps. The room was unusually cold, the air thick with a strange energy that made my heart race. Something was off. As I prepared to carry out my nightly routine, my eyes fell upon a body that was not supposed to be there. A living person had been mistakenly delivered to the morgue and left frozen in one of the cold storage units. Panic gripped me, and a chilling realization washed over me like a tidal wave. How could this happen? How could someone be alive and yet encased in the realm of the dead? With trembling hands, I approached the frozen figure. Their eyes were wide open, filled with sheer terror, as if they had been conscious throughout the entire ordeal. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, as fear gnawed at the pit of my stomach. Unable to bear the sight any longer, I rushed out of the morgue to seek help. I ran through the labyrinthine hallways, the darkness seemingly closing in around me. Finally, I reached the nurse's station, breathless and desperate. I pleaded with the staff to come to the morgue, to witness the impossible. But when we returned, the cold storage unit was empty. The living person, once frozen in time, had vanished without a trace. The hospital staff dismissed my account as a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had encountered something otherworldly, something that defied the laws of life and death. From that night on, I saw shadows lurking in every corner, and every gust of wind carried whispers of the unknown. The morgue, once a place of solace, had become a chamber of horrors. I was tormented by the unanswered questions, haunted by the thought that the living person was still out there, trapped in a chilling limbo. The hospital continues its operations, oblivious to the horrors that unfolded within its walls. A few days later, I was inspecting the bodies and accidentally came across the same person. Goosebumps ran across my skin, and he looked me straight in the eye. I tried to check his pulse, but his heart was no longer beating.
Story 6. Three friends who went for a walk in the woods met something that changed their lives forever. Until that day, they had not believed in the existence of anything beyond, but the next night made them believe. On a chilly autumn evening, three friends, Liam, Maya, and Alex, embarked on a hike through the dense Whitmore Woods, a forested region notorious for its labyrinthine trails. However, As daylight began to fade, it became clear that they had strayed far from the marked paths. The trio trudged on, hoping to find a clearing or campsite. Just as desperation began to set in, they stumbled upon an old house, nestled deep within the trees. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, windows boarded up, roof partially caved in, and nature trying to reclaim its foundations. Despite its derelict state, it offered shelter from the creeping cold and the impending darkness. Inside, the house was eerily preserved. Dusty furniture sat untouched, and old black and white family photos adorned the walls, their subjects' faces faded with time. The air was thick with a musty scent, and every footstep echoed through the house. They decided to camp in the living room, setting up their sleeping bags and lighting a few candles they had brought along. As the clock's hands neared midnight, the old house seemed to come alive with a symphony of its own. The gentle whispers of the wind outside were accompanied by the house's creaking timbers and rustling curtains. But beneath these familiar nocturnal sounds, a distinct and unsettling rhythm emerged. It began as a faint, almost imperceptible, tapping, reminiscent of a metronome or a muffled drum. As minutes ticked by, the sound evolved into a soft thudding, eerily mirroring the cadence of a human heart echoing from the depths below. The three friends exchanged wary glances, the initial comfort of their camaraderie now tainted with unease. Alex's fingers nervously tapped against his water bottle, mirroring the rhythm from below. Liam, eyes wide, tried to dismiss it as just another quirk of the old house, but the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate. Maya, her adventurous spirit unperturbed, felt a mix of curiosity and challenge. She'd always been the one to chase after the unknown, and this was no different. Locking eyes with Liam and Alex, she silently conveyed her intent to explore the source of the sound. Lighting a candle she had packed, its small flame casting dancing shadows on the peeling wallpaper, she approached the basement door. Its wood was cold to the touch, and as she slowly turned the knob, the thudding grew louder, more insistent. Liam wanted to voice his objections, his instinct screaming that they should leave this place and its mysteries behind. Alex, on the other hand, tried to put on a brave face, giving Maya an encouraging nod even as his stomach churned with anxiety. As Maya began her descent, each step echoing in the narrow stairwell, Liam and Alex strained their eyes to keep her in view. But the deeper she went, the more the dim glow of her candle receded, swallowed by the thick, oppressive darkness of the basement. Minutes felt like hours, and Maya's prolonged absence began to worry them. Alex decided to go after her, leaving Liam alone, anxiously waiting. But soon, even Alex's footsteps faded, and an oppressive silence filled the house. Liam, now truly alarmed, began searching the main floor for any clues. He stumbled upon a room that seemed to be an old study. The walls were covered in fading red pentagrams and strange symbols that seemed to be drawn in some dark, dried liquid. But what truly chilled him to the bone were the sketches, detailed drawings of people, their eyes exuding fear. As Liam's torchlight wandered, he found more recent drawings, eerily resembling Maya and Alex. Their sketched eyes seemed to plead for help. Frantic, Liam mustered the courage to go down to the basement. The thudding grew louder, more insistent. There, in the dimness, he found Maya and Alex, lying unconscious on the floor, their faces pale. Above them, two fresh drawings adorned the wall, their likenesses captured in chilling detail. With adrenaline pumping, Liam managed to rouse his friends, and the trio made a desperate dash out of the house. As they ran through the woods, the thudding sound followed them, growing fainter as they distanced themselves from the accursed house. By dawn, they reached the outskirts of the forest. The haunting events of the night left them traumatized, and they vowed never to venture into Whitmore Woods again. But the most chilling part was yet to come. A week later, Liam received an old, tattered envelope with no return address. Inside was a detailed sketch, his face, eyes wide with fear, now a part of the house's eerie gallery.
Story 7.
This story is about how a group of friends rented a house through Airbnb and did not even expect that the low price of the house would hide one drawback: the paranormal activities that take place in it. A winding road unfurls through the heart of a picturesque American countryside, culminating at the porch of a charming two-story house. The quaint home, bathed in the soft glow of a setting sun, has a welcoming sign hanging on its door. Birds are silhouetted against the fading light, and there's a stillness that suggests tranquility. A car comes into view, its engine humming softly. It pulls up to the driveway, and soon the dust settles to reveal 4 friends. Their camaraderie is evident from their intertwined arms and shared laughter, even without the spoken word. Laden with backpacks and suitcases, they approach the house with a spring in their step, exchanging glances filled with anticipation. As the hefty wooden front door creaks open, the house appears to take a deep, audible breath, as if waking from a long slumber. An almost tangible coolness seems to flow from the inner recesses of the house, creeping into the hallway, touching the very souls of the visitors. The friends pause for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing among them. The narrow hallway, lined with faded floral wallpaper, extends into the depth of the house, and the dim light reveals worn wooden floors, their boards whispering tales of bygone years. Gazing around, they find themselves in a spacious living room adorned with time-worn furniture. Dark mahogany tables and chairs, embroidered cushions, and a large chandelier with a few missing crystals dominate the space. A few portraits hang on the walls, their subjects' stern faces watching silently. Cobwebs hang discreetly in some corners, suggesting that the house hasn't entertained guests for some time. Outside, the yard seems to be stuck in time. Overgrown shrubs, a rusted swing set, and a stone pathway, now hidden under a blanket of fallen leaves, paint a picture of years of neglect. An old birdbath, devoid of water, stands as a lonely sentinel in the midst of the untamed greenery. The property's description, they recall, mentioned it being a bargain at just $50 a night, given its spaciousness. The low price was attributed to its character and history, but in hindsight, these terms seem to be euphemisms for the unsettling atmosphere that now enveloped them. While the group scatters to explore, one friend, Claire, a photography enthusiast, carefully places a vintage camera on an ornate side table. As the flash intermittently lights up the room, it captures their initial excitement, smiles, open suitcases, and the cheerful chaos of settling in. But among those pictures, some also capture Claire's pensive face. She had mentioned earlier, albeit hesitantly, about the house's energy, expressing her unease. Her friends had laughed it off, attributing her feelings to an overactive imagination. But now, as the weight of the house's history settled around them, her words seemed to carry a foreboding truth. Night descends, and the 4 gather in the living room. They light a fireplace, and its dancing flames cast both warmth and eerie shadows across the room. The house, once filled with laughter, slowly succumbs to a series of peculiar events. A sudden gust of wind blows out the fireplace. The friends jump, startled. They reignited, trying to laugh off their initial shock. But then, from the corner of the room, a rocking chair begins to sway on its own. Its creaks, rhythmic and persistent, add a dissonant soundtrack to their evening. Upstairs, a door slams shut. A friend's Polaroid camera spontaneously clicks, ejecting a photo. When the image develops, it reveals a shadowy figure standing behind one of them, its features blurred but its presence undeniable. The atmosphere becomes dense. The wind howls outside, the windows rattle, and the lights flicker. On a wall, framed family portraits seem to shift, their subjects' eyes following the friends. Then, in a heart-stopping moment, all goes quiet. The friends huddle together, feeling the weight of invisible eyes upon them. Just when the tension seems unbearable, a soft lullaby wafts through the air, its origin unclear. It's both calming and chilling. Dawn breaks, and the paranormal activity wanes. The once vibrant group, now pale and shaken, hurriedly pack their belongings. They leave the house as swiftly as they arrived, the car speeding away with a trail of dust behind it. The house, once again bathed in the morning sun, seems as innocuous as any other dwelling. But as the camera pans to a window, the reflection shows the shadowy figure, waving goodbye. The tale, recounted by one of the eyewitnesses through the lens of the vintage camera, serves as a chilling reminder of the unseen residents of the countryside abode. Story 8. What can happen when you stay home alone? Are you safe with a camera on the doorbell? Is it possible that someone will want to rob you and take all your property? That night, August 20th, 2013, the burglars got tricky. The chime of the doorbell breaks John's concentration. Setting his book aside, he glances at his smartphone. The doorbell's app displays a live feed of a man holding a pizza box, his cap shadowing most of his face. John's brow furrows in confusion. He's certain he didn't place any order tonight. The shadowy figure outside, clutching a pizza box, appears just as uncertain. The man's eyes dart around nervously, avoiding direct contact with the doorbell camera. Sweat glistens on his forehead, betraying his anxiety, even as he attempts to play the part of a relaxed delivery guy. Taking a deep, steadying breath, the burglar taps lightly on the door, trying to emulate the casual knock of a genuine delivery person. "Delivery," he calls out, his voice slightly shaky, betraying the facade. To further his charade, he shifts the pizza box to one hand and with the other, reaches into his pocket, pretending to pull out a receipt or order slip. He squints at it, leaning closer to the door, as if trying to match the address. All these actions, John surmises, are calculated moves to determine if someone's home and, if so, to convince them of the authenticity of the delivery. As John weighs the risks of confronting the so-called delivery man, the low hum of his smartphone's vibration draws his attention once more. The screen displays another figure, distinct from the first, stealthily approaching from the back garden's shadowy pathway. This second intruder, unlike the first, lacks the guise of a delivery person. Instead, he dons dark, nondescript clothing, seemingly designed to blend with the night. As he nears the door, he crouches, attempting to minimize his visibility. Periodically, he casts furtive glances towards the windows, possibly looking for signs of movement or light that might betray the presence of an occupant. At one point, he pauses, cocking his head slightly as if trying to catch any sounds from within, perhaps the murmur of a television or hushed conversations. Hearing nothing, he proceeds, taking out a small flashlight, its beam dimmed with a cloth, and surveys the door's lock and handle. Approaching the door, he gingerly tests the handle, hoping, perhaps, for the serendipity of an unlocked door. When it doesn't budge, he retrieves a set of slim tools from his pocket, likely lock-picking instruments, and sets to work. His actions are practiced, methodical even, but every so often he'd pause, looking over his shoulder, betraying an undercurrent of tension. All the while, unbeknownst to him, John watches, the doorbell app acting as his silent, unblinking eye, capturing every nuance of the intruder's behavior. Tension grips John. The pretense becomes clear. The delivery man is a distraction, a facade to gauge if anyone's home. Trying to keep calm, John silently moves away from the windows and reaches for the landline, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The first man knocks again, more forcefully this time, while the other begins inspecting the windows, perhaps looking for an entry point. In the otherwise tranquil ambience of the suburban evening, a faint but unmistakable wailing emerges. At first, it's just a distant murmur, blending with the natural sounds of the evening. However, as the seconds tick by, the siren's cry grows steadily more pronounced, breaking the calm and making its presence known. Both intruders, momentarily absorbed in their deceptive roles, suddenly freeze. Their heads snap up, trying to discern the direction and proximity of the approaching wail. The delivery man's eyes widen, the earlier facade of confidence replaced with a raw, unmistakable dread. He locks eyes with his accomplice, and in that brief, silent exchange, a realization passes between them: they're in jeopardy. A glimmering blue and red light, reflected first on the dewy grass and then on the neighboring homes, precedes the actual sight of the police cruiser. The rhythmic flash, typical of patrol cars, intensifies the burglar's alarm. They hadn't anticipated this. John's phone had died, after all. It was just an uncanny twist of fate. A routine patrol car had noticed something amiss. Maybe the unfamiliar delivery van parked too far from any house, or perhaps the oddly lurking figure at John's back door. Frantically, the delivery man drops the pizza box, its contents scattering, creating a trail of deception left behind. Without a shared word, both men bolt, their paths diverging as they desperately seek escape routes. One dashes toward the adjacent alleyway, while the other hurdles over a garden fence. The police cruiser, now clearly in view, slows as it nears John's residence, the observant officers already piecing together the unfolding scenario from the telltale signs left in the intruder's wake. John exhales deeply, releasing a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He sits back down, his heart still racing, and holds his cat close, finding solace in its purring. The doorbell camera's blinking light serves as a silent guardian, watching over a night that's regained its tranquility. Story 9. In a world awash with technology, where virtual connections often eclipse the tangible, there exists a realm known as Tinder. It's a digital universe where hearts are won and lost in the swipe of a finger, where connections are forged through the glow of a smartphone screen. And within this realm, our story unfolds. Meet Daniel, a young man with a penchant for adventure and a heart yearning for love. He navigated the endless profiles and witty bios, searching for that elusive spark. Then, one fateful evening, it happened, a match with a girl named Emily. Her profile was a canvas of intrigue, her photos a montage of mystery. Daniel was captivated by her enigmatic smile, the way her eyes sparkled in the soft light of her pictures. He sent the first message, a simple hello, but the conversation that followed was anything but ordinary. Emily possessed a way with words, a gift for storytelling that drew Daniel in like a moth to a flame. They talked about life, dreams, and aspirations. Every message from her was a literary masterpiece, a symphony of words that resonated in his soul. Their connection deepened, transcending the digital boundaries of Tinder. They exchanged phone numbers, and soon, their conversations moved beyond the app. Late-night calls turned into daily routines, their voices weaving a tapestry of intimacy. Daniel was falling, and he was falling hard. One day, Emily revealed a secret, a hidden gem of a place she had discovered, a secluded cabin nestled deep in the heart of the woods. She painted vivid pictures with her words, describing the cabin as a sanctuary away from the noise of the world. It was an invitation Daniel couldn't resist. With excitement coursing through his veins, he agreed to meet her at the cabin. Emily sent him the location, a set of coordinates that led to a remote, forested area. She assured him that the journey would be an adventure in itself, and Daniel, fueled by his growing affection, embarked on a quest to find this mysterious hideaway. The day of the journey arrived, and Daniel set out with a backpack filled with essentials, a heart brimming with anticipation, and a phone guiding him through the dense forest. The trek was challenging, the path winding through towering trees and babbling brooks. Yet, with each step, he felt closer to Emily, closer to the promise of their connection blossoming into something real. Hours turned into days as he ventured deeper into the wilderness. The coordinates seemed to lead him further from civilization, and Daniel began to question the accuracy of his navigation. Doubt gnawed at him, but his determination kept him moving forward. Then, as he rounded a bend in the forest trail, he saw it, the cabin, just as Emily had described. It was nestled in a serene clearing, bathed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. Its rustic charm beckoned to him, a promise of solace and love. Daniel approached the cabin with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in anticipation. But when the door creaked open, what he saw left him speechless. It wasn't Emily who greeted him, but a middle-aged man with a weathered face and piercing eyes. The man's voice was gruff as he asked, "Can I help you?" Confusion gripped Daniel as he stammered, I'm looking for Emily. She invited me here." The man's eyes bore into him, and then, with a sigh, he stepped aside, allowing Daniel to enter. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit, adorned with faded photographs and worn-out furniture. It felt like a place untouched by time, frozen in a bygone era. The man introduced himself as Samuel, the owner of the cabin. He explained that Emily had been his daughter, but she had tragically passed away years ago in a car accident. Daniel's heart sank as the truth unfolded. His beloved Emily was no longer among the living. Samuel went on to reveal that Emily had been passionate about the cabin, a place she had cherished since childhood. She had often dreamt of sharing it with someone special, and she had found that someone in Daniel. As the hours turned into a long night, Daniel and Samuel shared stories of Emily, and her presence seemed to fill the cabin. It was as if her spirit lingered there, guiding them toward an unexpected connection. In the days that followed, Daniel chose to stay at the cabin, finding solace in its quiet beauty and the memories of Emily that surrounded him. Samuel, too, embraced his presence, and the two forged an unlikely friendship born from their shared love for Emily. And so, a journey that had begun on Tinder, with swipes and messages, had led Daniel to a secluded cabin in the woods, and to a connection he could have never imagined. It was a reminder that love, in all its forms, could transcend the boundaries of life and death. As Daniel departed from the cabin, he felt Emily's presence more strongly than ever. It was as though she had guided him to Samuel, uniting two souls who had loved her deeply. And in that unexpected connection, he found solace, closure, and a bond that defied the boundaries of time and space. The world of Tinder had given him a match that was far more profound than he could have ever anticipated, a match that had led him to a love that transcended life itself. And as he walked away from the cabin, he knew that Emily's spirit would forever linger in the depths of his heart, a reminder of the extraordinary journey that had brought them together.
Story 10.
Delivering Darkness. Jake was a seasoned pizza delivery driver, used to the late-night deliveries and eerie experiences that often came with the job. But one particular night would forever haunt him, a night he would never forget. It was a chilly Friday evening, the sky overcast and the streets dimly lit. Jake's phone buzzed with a new order, and he glanced at the address, 621 Pine Street. The address was in a quiet, suburban neighborhood known for its old, Victorian-style houses. As he approached Pine Street, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The house at 621 Pine Street was different from the rest. It was a massive, Gothic mansion that seemed to loom over the street. The windows were dark, and the place looked abandoned. The only sign of life was a faint glow coming from a single window on the upper floor. Jake hesitated but decided to fulfill the order, as it was the last delivery of the night. Carrying the pizza box, he made his way up the creaking front steps and knocked on the heavy wooden door. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the door slowly opened, revealing a dimly lit, cavernous interior. Jake couldn't see anyone inside, but he called out, "Pizza delivery." A raspy voice from deep within the house replied, "Come in, please." The voice sent shivers down Jake's spine, but he cautiously entered the house, his senses on high alert. The air inside was thick with an oppressive, musty odor, and the dim light cast long, eerie shadows. He followed the voice through a maze of dark hallways, his footsteps echoing through the empty house. Finally, he reached a small, dimly lit room where an old woman sat alone at a table set for two. She was hunched over, her face obscured by the shadows. "Thank you for coming," the woman said, her voice a low whisper. "Please, have a seat." Jake reluctantly sat down, placing the pizza box on the table. He couldn't see the woman's face clearly, but her presence filled him with dread. Something about this situation didn't feel right. The old woman gestured for him to open the pizza box, and Jake complied, revealing the piping hot pizza. She reached out a bony hand to grab a slice but stopped abruptly, her fingers inches away from the food. "You didn't bring the right order," she hissed, her voice filled with anger. Jake was taken aback. He had double-checked the order before leaving the pizzeria, and he was certain he had brought the correct pizza. He tried to explain, but the woman's reaction grew increasingly erratic. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. Jake fumbled for his phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. When the light pierced the darkness, he was met with an unsettling sight. The old woman was gone, and the table was set for a sinister dinner, with a plate of rotting, maggot-infested food. Panic surged through Jake as he realized he was alone in the pitch-black house. He scrambled to his feet and made a run for the front door, but it slammed shut in front of him, trapping him inside. Desperate and terrified, Jake searched for another way out. He stumbled upon a staircase that led to the basement. With no other option, he descended into the darkness below. In the basement, he discovered a room filled with candles, strange symbols, and a collection of old photographs. The pictures showed people who had gone missing over the years, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Jake realized he had stumbled upon something much darker than a simple pizza delivery. The old woman and her eerie house were connected to a series of unsolved disappearances, and he had become entangled in a nightmare. As he continued to explore the basement, he heard footsteps above. Someone, or something, was in the house with him. Fear coursing through his veins, he realized he had to find a way out before it was too late. Jake located a small window in the basement and managed to pry it open. He squeezed through, cutting himself on the broken glass, and tumbled into the backyard. He raced to his car and sped away from the nightmare-sh house, leaving behind the horrors he had witnessed. Jake's harrowing experience haunted him for years. He contacted the police, but they found no evidence of the old woman or the basement filled with disturbing photographs. The address on Pine Street was empty and boarded up, as if it had never been inhabited. To this day, Jake can't forget that night, and the fear that lingers in the darkest corners of his memory. The mystery of 621 Pine Street remains unsolved, a chilling reminder that some horrors are best left undisturbed.